Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Jensen from Dubuque PD. He has over 34 years experience in law enforcement. He's a certified emotional intelligence coach. He has a bachelor's in criminal justice, a master's in communication, and is a graduate of the FBI National Academy. Welcome to today's episode. Chief Jensen, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm looking forward to it. So I was going through your bio and I saw certified emotional intelligence coach, and I got really excited because I've had numbers of conversations with different chiefs, and the question has come up many times of, can emotional intelligence be taught? What does emotional intelligence look like? And especially for the younger generation that maybe doesn't have a lot of life and work experience, how do you teach that? So, can you give us a little bit of insight on your experience with emotional intelligence? And do you think that it can be taught?
Sure. For one, to start off with, it can be taught. Absolutely. Most people have an understanding that emotions are important. That it's across the board. It's just a matter if they can put it into words or not. About 2018, or maybe a little earlier than that, actually, it was earlier than that, we started having problems with communication across the board where we saw officers and the public weren't communicating well together. I was working internal affairs. I started seeing complaints start to come in, and it really wasn't that either person was wrong, they just weren't communicating well. So we started a program then just about how the officers just realize what they're bringing to the table that day when they come to work.
Mm,
What are the things going on that are causing you emotions, essentially frustration, being a big one. Years ago, uh, it was taught for law enforcement officers, turn off home when you go into work and then turn it back on when you get off of work. Well, that's not realistic. You can't do that. And so it really started working with officers to be able just to discuss what's going on, bringing it up to other people and start to mitigating, some of those things. And also as a kind of a help for the officer and their partners to know, well, they're not in a good space today. Maybe I should step in on this one and
mm,
and keep them out of trouble. So we started down that road. We did that for a while, and then we realized we probably should get some kind of backing for what we're doing because it was something we just kind of started. And so we partnered with one of our local universities, started down a program with personal empowerment, which was good, but it really wasn't the final piece. And so we started really looking at emotional intelligence. We got involved with a company called 6 Seconds, and we started working on programming and how we could really make emotional intelligence just common language.
mm.
Um, it actually took off in the whole city organization, not just the police department. So we've been doing that for a number of years now. But as it's got into coaching, the coaching seemed to be the piece where you got the most out of emotional intelligence.
Mm.
Uh, back to when somebody in our business, when somebody gets emotionally hijacked, bad things happen. That's when they start to show up on the news. Uh, the very minimum, they're sued. The worst case scenario, they go to jail, or even, I mean, even worse. So we were looking at how can we bring the emotions down in a job that's can be very emotional at times, and how can we do that to get because we know when you get emotional, you end up emotionally hijacked, you become tunnel vision, and that's what that is. So we started to really work on that, using the coaching side of it. Um, Now, traditionally, in the certified coaching side of it, that is a confidential piece. It can happen just like therapy, that kind of working through that. But also, you can use those skills, how to ask better questions, how to find out, again, get people, most people know they're having emotions, they just don't know how to name them. We use a phrase called name it to tame it. It's
Mm.
like, get it out there. Whether you write it down, tell somebody, say it out loud, do whatever, it just to start to mitigate the emotion and take it down a notch or two to help with that. So on the coaching side, done a lot of coaching, and it kind of segues into talking about communication at some point. But a lot of what I was doing is how to talk with somebody individually, how to talk with a coworker or talk with a boss or that, and how to when you're starting out, like again with high stress, walking into a situation, going, I just can't talk to them. I don't know how to do it. You start to the emotional brain works so much faster than the logical brain, like 80,000 times faster. So you can't put logic into things. And so that's where you started to see that. So using the coaching side of it, do a lot of coaching for leaders, how to talk to people. And that it really worked really well. And
Yeah.
getting a common language and getting where it's not scary or not weird to talk about emotions. And so that's helped a lot.
Thank you. It sounds to me that the first step was that self assessment. I love that you said, name it to tame it. Like, what are we going through in this moment? Like, how am I feeling? How am I responding to situations and why? And so to me, it sounds like that's kind of what that first step was initially. It was like, how do we self assess? And I would imagine that when you have the ability to say, hey, like, I'm feeling really frustrated today, and here's why, then you're able to then see that in others as well. And you're also able to understand when other people are going through those things because you understand how it feels for you to go through those things. And so it becomes this partnership between you and the people that you're working with or that you're working for. And I think that that's incredibly powerful. If we can sit back and say, hey, I've been through that too, or something similar, or I've been through a situation where I've been really sad or really scared or really frustrated, and I understand how that feels for me. And therefore, I can understand how that feels for other people.
Right. And it was very important for community members, because you can go to your fifth, you know, drunk fight for the night and they kind of get cumulative, but what's the underlying things that are going on there? And
Yep.
that's empathy. Empathy is the hugest piece, I think, to emotional intelligence. You need that as a starting point, because if you don't have that, you're just not going to be successful in the emotional intelligence.
Right. Yeah, I agree. You said that this was something that took off. It was really successful. You started the coaching. Did you see any specific return on investment for the time and energy that you put into this coaching? Were you seeing like less use of force, or were you having, better feedback from community members with interactions that they had with your team? Was there anything like tangible that you started to see from that?
Yeah, what I've seen is that so being the chief, I can't coach employees, but I have people. My one of our lieutenants does some of that for the employees, but we did see less of those complaints where it was, again, it was just not connecting across the board and understanding yourself. Also, um, we saw across our department just that willingness for people to say, I'm having a real crappy day. Yeah. When I came into this business, you didn't talk about your personal stuff. You didn't do any of that. Um, you didn't come in and say, you know what, it really stinks. That call stunk. I couldn't, it just really bothered me in that. You didn't talk about that stuff. Now you hear that frequently. Now you hear officers asking about it. You know, it has segued into, it's the base for everything. It's a base for our peer support. It's a base for um, our de-escalation. It's a base for just how we talk to people. It's a base for our philosophy of being good community members and treating people like their family. I mean, it ended up being a base for everything. So we really are seeing the return on the investment because those complaints are way down from other people coaching on these conversations. Following up, how did that conversation go? It actually went really well. I really kind of understand where they're coming from now, or vice versa, they're understanding me. So that's a piece that's really been very, very successful for us.
Yeah, it sounds like it's helped to create a strong culture within the organization. And, I think about this a lot because I've had, hundreds of chiefs on the podcast, and they all come from the generation that you did, where it's like we didn't talk about these things. And a lot of the conversations I've had, it's, because of, fear of judgment, or, it just wasn't the place for you to say something because someone else would be like, what are you doing? Like rub dirt on it, like move on. There
Yeah.
was this judgment that was coming from it. And I think that there's two things that are happening now. We're allowing people, the opportunities to speak about it, creating a safe space for that, but then also educating on other people on how to show up for those people. You said asking better questions, being able to show up and be like, how are you doing? Are you okay? How did that call go? And so I think it's a reminder for us that, like, yes, we want to feel safe to be able to say things, or we want to be encouraged to, say things if they're bothering us. But then how are we also showing up for other people? Are we showing up for other people with judgment, or are we showing up for other people with compassion? And teaching that compassion part of it, because at the end of the day, you guys spend more time with each other than you do sometimes with your families, and it's important to have a healthy culture where everyone is there for the betterment of one another.
And it needs to be modeled from the top down. It really does. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in this realm, but it really does. The ability to say, an officer comes up to me and says, how's your day going? I'll give you an example. The previous chief retired, and 6 months later just died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, and he was young. He was, in his 50s, and it just died. And I had one of the newest officers at the time come up to me and he said, Chief, I think you're um, I don't know this for a fact, but I just assume you were close to him. How are you doing?
Wow.
So, and to have that across, to have that happen, and that has stuck with me, and being able to do that. The other piece is just not allowing people to say I'm fine.
Mhm.
And fine's not an emotion. you know,
I
fine,
like
fine is
that.
the ability I can stay in the middle of the emotions, and depends on where this conversation goes. I can go any way with it, but it's not an emotion. And so to say that I'm fine, okay. So following that up. So tell me about that. What's fine? What is
Yeah.
fine? And having that, and it's kind of the joke around here because I say that quite a bit when somebody says I'm fine. I'll say it's not an emotion, and to go from that. But yeah, that's a big important piece to be able to follow up and not just let it sit.
Wow, I really appreciate you sharing that story, and I think that that shows an ROI right there. For someone to be like to have the emotional intelligence to make that assumption and be like, "Wow, I bet Chief was close to that person. I'm going to take time out of my day to ask him how he's doing." I think that that is like, that speaks volumes to the work that you guys have done. And I love fine is not an emotion. I've never heard that before, but I agree. I think it's such a throwaway answer to anything. It's kind of that what we say when we don't really want to say what we're actually thinking or feeling. So I love that you say that and you follow up with fine's not an emotion. Let's figure it out. Like, where are we actually at?
Wait, have you ever had that where you ask that question just out of habit? How you doing? And then
Yep.
somebody doesn't answer it like I'm fine or okay or that, and they give you the totally, and you're like, whoa. And that's where, as a asker, we have to be in that position to be we if I really want to know what's going on, I have to ask the question, and when I get those answers, and then follow that up, because that's somebody being transparent and saying, you know what, I really am having a bad day, or something like that.
Yeah, I think that when we ask those questions, we have to have the time to stick around and actually have the conversation. I've
Mhm.
said this many times on this podcast that my biggest pet peeve is when someone comes up and they ask me how I'm doing and they just keep walking. Like they don't even wait for me to say
Mhm.
anything. It's just such a check the box and they don't really care. They're not really trying to stick around to know how I'm doing or not. One of my biggest pet peeves, and I think we still see it a lot. I see it at a lot of conferences. Everyone's like, hey, Paige, how are you? And I'm like, oh, and I'm in the middle of saying something and they're gone, and
Mhm.
so I think that there's also a little bit of self-awareness that we can have, when we're asking those questions. We don't always have to say, how are you doing? If we don't have the time, we can just be like, hey, good to see you. And
Yeah.
then, we don't have to ask a question. But I think it's important if we do ask the question that we make sure that we carve out the time to hear the answer and have that conversation. And so if you don't have time, maybe don't ask the question.
Right.
It's
And that's
my
caring.
opinion.
That's caring.
Yeah,
Caring is that truly caring. And, this is built on trust. And if you don't trust that I really care, because every time I ask it, I'm gone, and I don't truly listen, then it loses a lot of what we're trying to do.
100%. And I do want to talk a little bit about communication because, obviously, I said in your intro, you have a master's in communication. How important do you think effective communication is in law enforcement as a whole? And do you have any tips and tricks that you can teach anyone on how to be more effective with their communication?
And I wish I had the magic wand for this one, because it is the number one thing. I mean, we are in the communication business. That's what we do, on all levels. I mean, from the get-go, internally, externally, we're relaying information, getting information. A lot of the information that we have has some high stakes stuff to it, and we have to be very good at what we do, or it creates more problems. It creates distrust. It creates panic. How we communicate can cause that. Um, you know, the one thing I think, like externally, uh, I believe, and it has worked very well in our community, is to communicate as much as we possibly can, but also under that pretense that we're building that trust. That at the point where we say we can't communicate that, um, for example, we've had a couple officer-involved shootings in the last couple of years. Uh, Bring together some community members, and they want info, and I have to literally say, trust me, the info will come out, but it's not going to come out right now. And that's part of that communication ahead of time,
Hmm.
with these community members, talking to them, getting to know them, and saying this is how this is going to happen when it happens, just so you understand it's not a surprise. And you're thinking that we're going off script or doing something unusual, or we're trying to hide something. Internally, it is very tough to communicate across businesses that are 24/7, 365, to get, and from my position, to get information relayed down. The I think the biggest piece is to have the layers that are very good at communicating too. Because if it gets lost, it's the game of telephone. It gets lost in translation. The more people that touch it, the meaning changes. But to have where they truly understand the meaning and what you're trying to get across, and then vice versa. Being people being able to come up to me and talk to me. We're roughly 100 people, 120. Um, it's small enough where people can still come up and talk to you, but it's big enough where they're scared to come up and talk to the boss. And that's the things that. So to have that and have that ability, where interactions are intentional, I think face to face is huge. And a lot of the coaching, and we talk about EQ coaching I did, was post COVID, and it was people coming back to the office and they were really struggling with interacting with each other. And suddenly being face to face again, and it was a real struggle. I think there's, the speed of what we do things, there is the need to do things that are not necessarily face to face, but also I think the face to face happens with a lot of organic conversations that you don't have on the online side. Because the meeting starts and you're going in. So to have that and start to build the trust, communication, really, it is a two-way street. I keep talking about us giving information, but we also have to listen and truly listen to what's being said. Um, you know, it's easy to, yep, we already talked about that. Blow it off. It's easy not that yep, I've heard that 20,000 times in the community, or I've heard that 20,000 times from the officers. It's easy to, but really truly listen, because there may be a piece in there because we start to shut it off and start to fill in the blanks. I know where this is going, where you might actually have a very um, good piece of information that you need to make a good decision. Now, public wise, sometimes you got to go and just spend time with people. I have a chronic complainer who was complaining about a speeder on the street, and he went through all the chain of command, everybody, and then finally I just went and visited him to find out that his wife was having issues. And that's the underlying thing. But I had to go visit him to find it. It wasn't coming through the emails that are getting blasted through my
Sure.
uh, inbox every day. But that's a piece where you have that. So the communication piece, I think, is just spending time with people, listening, talking, actually talking, and getting out what is really going on there.
Yeah.
Does it work 100% of the time? No, absolutely not. But it is also the first thing that fails. It's the first thing that goes to crap in any situation is communication. And so to have that and have that as just part of what you do takes practice. But to have that as part of what you do, when it does hit the fan, you really do have a good system in play, and it minimizes the issues that happen with it.
Yeah, I love that you said it takes practice and consistency, with everything that we're doing. Like, you would think about any sort of training. And I think communication is also another thing that can be trained, right? You can learn
Mhm.
that, you can hone your skills, you can become a better communicator over time. But you said being intentional with your time, being intentional with what you say, being intentional with listening, those are things that we have to do. And if we don't do it, then we're never going to get better, right? So, how can we be more intentional with our training and how we show up, and maybe even goal setting for ourselves or even going back to that self assessment, can we dissect every interaction we have with somebody? I know that that's a lot for you guys. You have a lot of
Mhm.
calls, for service, or a lot of interactions even within the PD, but, can we dissect those, or maybe even a handful of those, and ask ourselves, did I show up in the best possible way? Did I ask really good questions? Did I listen to their response, and did I care about what they were saying? Did I have an open mind? Was I as effective as I could have been with my communication, or were there things that were lost in translation? And then we can kind of, take note of the things that maybe could be improved upon. And then how do we apply that to the next set of interactions that we have? And you just repeat that until you feel like you become an expert. You're never going to be perfect, like you said, but I do think that we can get pretty darn good if we, really take it seriously. I love that you also talked about trust, because trust is earned, right? And so for you to tell the public, hey, trust me, it will come out, but not right now. If you came out day one and they had no idea who you were, and you hadn't put those investments, or you haven't shown them that you can be trusted, they might be like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
Like, why are we going to trust what you say? Like, we don't even know, what's going on here. But because someone said it was like, I can't remember the word, but basically it was like small investments, small deposits. I think it was
Mhm.
deposits, small deposits every day of showing people and proving to people that you can be trusted. Then in those big moments when you say, hey, trust me, it will come out, not right now, but it will. They're gonna be like, okay, I know his character or her character, and there have been these small pieces of evidence over time that this person is someone that I can trust.
I mean, you look at it, there's a power dynamic from the get-go with the police. And you show up in uniform and you starting with that as a piece. But I think the other piece to this is being able to say, I screwed up. Or maybe that interaction didn't go well. Going back to somebody saying, you know what, let's start over. That didn't go well. That's not what my intention was. Instead of compounding it, and making it worse and worse and worse. Uh, that goes such a long ways with people. I have found it's just like you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that the best. Let me start over here and let's do it differently. And to watch that it turns a naysayer into an ally a
Mhm.
great majority of the time. And they're like, you know what, the chief came back and talked to me and said no, they screwed up, and and when we do make the mistakes to say that, particularly on the individual level. I mean, we say them publicly on the bigger scale, but to do it on the individual level is so important in the communication side.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know it all, and sometimes I don't do it well, and to say that to people, it humanizes you.
100%. Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, especially when you're in a position of leadership. There I think somewhere along the way, people were told that they have to be perfect or, they can't make mistakes. And for someone to be like, hey, I am human and I did make a mistake and I'm humble enough to, say, I made a mistake and how can we start over? I do think that I think that that speaks volumes. And I think that people really relate to that because I think that we can relate on that human level of understanding, yeah, I'm not perfect either. I've messed up too, and I think people
Mhm.
appreciate that. So I agree. I did want to go back to what you said about, as an organization, it can be like a game of telephone and it can be really difficult to effectively communicate and relay information from the top all the way down. But you said it's important to have layers, where leadership, all the way down are really good at communicating, maybe on the behalf of the chief. How can, how do I want to position this question? How can communication within leadership or those different layers that you mentioned reduce internal stress and improve the wellness of an organization?
Sure. You look at that, you can give the most simple direction. We need to enforce traffic on the street on this day. Pretty simple. By the time, if it's not really explained, by the time it goes through all these people, again, people you don't see because it's 24/7, 365. So there's not an organic explanation that happens in the hall. It comes down to, well, the chief just imposed a quota on us. They want us to write 15 tickets a day out there.
Mm.
And literally it started with this. So it becomes that layer piece becomes where um, like you have we're a bureaucracy. We have levels, right? We have rank structure, but to understand that, no, I know what the chief's intent is. He's not ever going to tell us to do that, to understand, because I can't touch base with every single officer every single day to do, in an organization my size over 365. It's hard just to build that trust. So the trust is built through the layers on
Mm.
that. No, I know the chief. I spent time. I used to work with the chief. This is what he means. This is his background, in this, uh, to have that. So that's really critical to that piece to have people who can hold the message true, give a further explanation if it needs to be. Again, sometimes don't do really good um, ad relaying that, right? To saying, hey, I need this done. Because in the heat of the moment, in the stress, or I'm getting stressed from city manager or somebody that says you got to get this done, and you put it out, and to have people that are able to either come back and ask further questions or understand the intent because they know where you're at, know your intent on that.
Yeah, I had someone recently say, how can we create an environment where everyone assumes positive intent?
Hmm.
And
And that's
I really
emotional
like that.
intelligence from the get go.
Yeah.
As soon as you have a conversation with anybody, assume positive intent.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, how can I look at it differently? We do an exercise called Think, Feel, Act. How did you think about it? Change how you thought about it. I thought
Mm.
negatively about it to begin with. I changed it positively. Maybe they're saying that because they're having a bad day. Well, now it just changed my feelings about it. I went from being angry, like, oh, of course you're accusing me of this, to like, well, maybe you're having a real stressful time. It causes me to ask questions. So, this isn't normally like you. Is there something going on behind this? I'm
Mm.
not used to this the way it's going, and that helps a lot, and it changes your actions on it then.
Yeah.
Uh,
Think, feel, act. I think that's really powerful. Yeah. And I think even if you've created an environment where communication is a part of it, maybe it's, hey, so and so, my initial thought was that you did this to just make me mad or
mhm.
to burn everything down. Am I thinking about this in the wrong way? And to give someone the opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you thought about it that way. This was actually why I did it, and this was the intent behind it. And having that open dialogue with other people, because maybe sometimes you can't see someone else's perspective, but if you've created the lines of communication where someone can go up to you and say, hey, this is how I thought about it. Like, this is how, I perceived this particular situation. Am I on point or am I way off of track? Then I think then it opens up that opportunity before you start to feel upset or before you act, on something that maybe is inappropriate or out of line.
it adds a number of things to it because when you do that, you're saying it's me. This is how I feel on this. That might not have been your intention. It opens up. It starts to de-escalate yourself on this as you start to like, okay, now I'm naming it to tame it because I felt like this when you said that. Um, and that's why, emails and text, why emojis are so important in emails and text, because you got to have the emotion with it. Otherwise, I can read it however I want to read it. But if you put a certain emoji or series of emojis with it, I really know how you're feeling or what your intent is. Without it, it's open for interpretation. And that's why uh, you see that where, when you're talking communication, because nonverbals, and I was going to touch on this earlier, but nonverbals are so important.
Hmm.
As we were talking about the person that just says hi to you or it says, how you doing? It's already gone by the time you get to answer, to have the nonverbals are, 93% of communication. So if I roll my eyes or make a face or something like that, or cross my arms even, I mean, all these nonverbal cues that we're picking up, your mouth is saying one thing, but the rest of you is not. In
Yeah.
police work, that's what we're looking for is the nonverbals. You tell me anything you want. I'm looking at the nonverbals to see if you're telling me the truth, you
Yeah.
know.
Interesting. That's interesting that emojis are kind of a replacement for the nonverbals in an environment where you don't have the opportunity to see that. For you to like show, like you said, show intent or show how you're feeling about things. That's really interesting. I've never had anyone say that before. I'm going to start using more emojis. I always like in my head, because I'm an overthinker, I'm always like, is it inappropriate, like not inappropriate but like unprofessional for me to be sending all these like emojis to someone, but I could see how that could be really effective for showing someone how I actually feel about something, especially if it could be read in a different way. So thank you for that. um, my last little section is going to be about wellness, which I think that everything that we've talked about is wellness, teaching people how to communicate, teaching people emotional intelligence, having positive or assuming positive intent. I think everything we've talked about so far really plays into the culture of an organization, which is wellness. But you had mentioned that you think that wellness goes far beyond just the physical. You really try to take more of a dynamic approach to wellness. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy on maybe the different pillars of wellness and some of the things that you guys have done that have been successful?
Sure. I mean, and from my experience, I saw that, the physical side that we pushed for years and years, the physical side is important, right? Until you physically can't do that. I had a friend that was a big weightlifter. That was his relief, till his shoulders went bad. And then he's looking for another relief.
Mhm.
Then got to drinking because I have no other relief. I don't know what else to do. This is the only way I knew how to get the mental relief from the stress. And this is prior to us having all kinds of layers of like peer support and employee assistance and all different kind of things that you can do. But that was a piece. So we started looking at what's the mental? How do we keep the mental side of this um, very important? That's where emotional intelligence came in. Our peer support, our psychiatric check-ins are once a year. All these pieces that a lot of places are doing. That's not uh, wow, you guys are the only ones. No, a lot of people are doing that because they're recognizing that. And then you have a piece of the spiritual side. Everybody has a spiritual side to that. What that is, and being able to connect to that, because a lot of people that's a strong identity for them. A lot of officers that's a strong identity. You start to take that away, and you start to run into. It's almost like chopping off a limb to a degree. You're losing a piece of you that's very important. So
Mhm.
trying to be able to embrace that, not where it gets in the way of what we're doing, but embracing so people can be really who they are, and feel complete. Another piece is financial. You can throw that in there too. I mean, a financial piece to make sure that people are uh, stable, because that crosses a lot of stress, right? Finance stress, that stuff that you talk about outside of work. That's a huge one that happens. So having the ability, having where to point people, where to push them, saying, hey, we got a resource here. Again, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink, but you can say, here's a resource for you if you would like to use that. Having multiple layers of that, even we talk about the spiritual and mental kind of mixed together, but having a peer support at that level, but also having a chaplain program available, having a psychiatrist available, having all these pieces that one's not for me, but that one might be. Or that one's
Mhm.
not for me, that one might be. At least having a number of things where somebody can land and feel comfortable in talking about their wellness. Again, all three of those, when we talk about the spiritual, mental, and physical, are very, very important pieces to make you a whole person.
I like that you said whole. And we hear the word holistic a lot. And I think some people still like kind of roll their eyes at that and think that's like a woo woo word. But I heard someone say whole spelled WHOL, like
Yep.
holistic, trying to make you whole. And I liked that a lot because it's like, yeah, that's the goal is like, how do we make sure that everyone feels like they have a soft landing if and when they need it? Because it's not a one size fits all. With anything, you could put this in a simple example. You could be in a briefing room and be like, what do you guys want for lunch? And you're going to have 15, 20 different answers. It's never going to be a one size fits all with anybody when we're dealing with different personalities, different backgrounds, different times in their career. Everyone's going to want or need different things. So having different options, I do think is really important. I want to circle back to what you said before, because I thought this was really powerful. You said that, you knew someone who worked out. That was their one and only thing. They got injured or their shoulders went out and they turned to an unhealthy coping mechanism because they didn't feel like they had anywhere else to go. We see this a lot, right? We see a lot of people reaching for ways to avoid or escape or numb because maybe they don't have the habits built for those healthy coping mechanisms. And one of the things that you had talked about when we talked offline was how to build healthy habits at work and at home. And in my mind, it's multidimensional. It does include a lot of the different things that you said. So, how do you encourage people to actually take action for themselves? Because you said you can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink. How do we make them drink?
Yeah,
How do we get them to take action and to build those healthy habits for themselves so that, if they do become injured, they have something else going for them, or they have a support system for them that can help them get through.
it starts with friends and family. I mean, that's really where it starts. Part of what we do as our wellness component is start to bring family and friends into that
Mm,
and to say, hey, you know what? If you start to see signs of this, don't be afraid to speak up. This is in the best interest of, because usually the first time you hear about it is when it's too late, right? Something bad has happened. Somebody's going to jail or, something or worse. And that's the piece where we start with and like doing a lot of things to make it's okay to talk about it. Yeah, you talk about your coworkers again. You know how they are. They're acting differently to speak up to them or speak up to somebody and say, hey, you know what? We've had that in our organization, which is again a win where they're like, you know what? So and so just doesn't seem right,
mm,
or they're in a really bad spot and they don't know how to get out of it. And so then we can activate a number of resources or try to find a point at least to get them into something to get it down that road. But that's what I find is the most critical piece is that the people that are closest to them, around them the most, and where it is okay, and not being offended when somebody says, "Hey, I noticed you're not your normal self,"
yeah.
and to get that, and we've had really good success again by just normalizing that it's okay to talk about it, and we're having good success with that where people aren't offended that somebody can went and talked to their lieutenant because so and so just says, and I don't know what to do, and they know it's out of caring, it's not out of trying to get you in trouble.
Yeah. I think this conversation about bringing in family and bringing in spouses is something that is starting to expand. I notice trends with wellness. I've been in the space long enough to kind of notice some of the things. You said financial. I know financial is one of those trends right now that is really at the top of a lot of people's list. And then home or family wellness is another one of those things that everybody's talking about. I think it's a really smart strategy to give education and resources, and I think it's twofold. One, how can you train them or educate them to be able to look for the signs so that they are also a support system? How can we also connect them with other people so that they can talk to other people? I've heard of, spouse networks, connecting everyone like on a Facebook group or an email chain or whatever that looks like for you guys, but where spouses have other people who are also going through those same things to talk to. Maybe they have a connection with someone within the organization where they can flag these things to leadership or the mental health provider or whatever that looks like. And then how can we also give them resources? Because we know that it's incredibly difficult to be a family member or a spouse of someone in public safety. And they are stressed dealing with you guys, or they're, afraid that you guys aren't going to come home, or, whatever that looks like. How do we make sure that they also have resources so that they're supported? So I predict that this is going to be a bigger area of conversation and focus over the next couple of years, because I do see that trend, like trending in that way.
And you're definitely seeing some psychologists and leaning into the focusing on first responders. We were lucky, and we have one we partner with locally that essentially build a business around first responders, police, fire, 911, all that, and their families. And so because that's a lot of the hard part too, is being able, particularly as a family member, I need to talk to somebody. How do I get in, and getting into the system, or even just trying to make an appointment is sometimes very difficult. And having that, again, person you trust, person you've heard them talk, there's that is very key.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for everything that you shared today. My final question is for that younger generation that is entering into the career today. What words of wisdom would you share with them if you could maybe go back in time with all the knowledge that you have now and speak to your younger self?
Yeah, I think that's that ability to about what we talked about with conversation is it's not scary to be transparent. It's not scary to be communicate with people. It's not scary, and it's not bad to let people see you as a person. You hear a lot of that where it's like, I don't want people to know I'm a cop. Well, they all know you're a cop. You walk in a room, everybody knew it the minute you walked in because somebody told somebody. And having that, it's not scary to do that. Let people, the community we serve particularly, see you as a police officer, or see you as a person and a police officer, and kind of connecting the two together. And I think that's a really big piece. I use this a lot with the new hires we have. Be on a first name basis with people.
Mm.
My first name is not officer. My first name is not chief. That's not. My first name's Jeremy. And that's starting with that, being on a first name basis, and what starts that whole building a trust factor. And so or a trust relationship, that's what you need to have. And so I give that a lot to the new hires, be on a first name basis.
Yeah.
And I think I wish I had that early on. It would, I think, de-escalated and created it, and probably had a lot less problems with people by doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.